Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back for part 3 of this miter saw station build series. Now, if you happen to miss part 1 and 2 of this build series, basically I just built a bunch of cabinets and got them in place in part 1, and then in part 2 I built a bunch of drawers and shelves for storage for the base of this miter saw station. Now, that means that part 3 is going to be all about getting a top installed on this miter saw station. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get a top on this thing. All right guys, it's finally time to get a top on this thing. This whole miter saw station would not be very good without one. So the first step I'm gonna do is just take some measurements for each of the sections for my top. Now there's gonna be 3 separate sections, one here, one small one here, and another small one there. So I'm just gonna go ahead, take those measurements, and then get my plywood pieces cut down to size.
So these plywood pieces were a little too large to safely run through the table saw on my own, so I decided to cut them with my circular saw instead. To help get a bit of a cleaner cut, I just laid down some painter's tape before cutting, and this leaves me with a much smoother edge, free from a lot of that typical tear out.
All right, so I've got the pieces sort of laid out here for my top, but remember, because I had to notch out this section here to accommodate my miter saw being able to make angled cuts, I'm going to need to cut this off at a slant. So I'm just gonna mark on my board where I cut out here, and then I'll just basically just cut off this edge on both sides. All right guys, so I got all of the pieces for the tops cut out, and now what I wanna do is I wanna install some Formica laminate on top of them. I've installed, even though I've got it covered up right now, I installed some laminate onto this worktop here, and I just found it to be so nice when it comes to working because glue doesn't stick to it. It's super easy to clean up. It's pretty durable. So I decided to go ahead and invest in installing Formica on all of these tops. That way, hopefully this will just hold up really well over time. So the Formica that I got, it's not, oh gosh, it's heavy. Hold on one second. Let me cut this down. All right, now I actually picked this stuff up from Home Depot. Now I've never seen it in the store itself, but if you go on to homedepot.com, they have all different types of, in different designs of Formica laminate. The one I did on this top, I just chose to do black. But the one thing I will say about the black is that even though it looks pretty simple and cool, it shows dust like crazy. So I thought for this miter saw station, since there's gonna be a lot of dust, I would go with something that maybe wouldn't show it as bad. Now I know I did paint the entire base cabinet black, so that's gonna show dust, but that was paint I had left over and I wasn't wanting to spend any more money on paint. So that's why I did the black, but I think the contrast between the black base and this will look really cool. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can cut this. My next step is to go ahead and get this thing cut to size for all of the different tops that I need. I've seen some people cut this on the table saw or with a circular saw, but I don't really trust my blade to not chip this out. And what I've done in the past is I've just used one of these little laminate scores. I'll basically just mark and measure where I want to score my piece, and then once you score it enough times, it'll break right on that line. I'll show you guys how to do that. I'll show you a few of the steps for installing this laminate, but I will tell you that I already have a video out on my channel where I really go into all the details of how to install laminate. So if you're curious about all the steps and the whole process, then I'll leave that video link so you can go and check that out. All right, let's get this stuff installed. Now, a couple of things to note when doing this, and these are just things that I learned from doing this last time. I like to wear gloves. These are just some cut resistant gloves, but probably any gloves would help out because when you cut this laminate edge and you break it along that line, it is very sharp. Last time I did this, I sliced my finger so badly, which I would have never guessed that this would have been that sharp when I snapped this line, but it totally was. So wear gloves if you can. Wear safety glasses, and then lastly, wear some sort of ear protection because this is very similar to the whole nails on the chalkboard sound, which I absolutely cannot stand, so I'll be wearing these headphones as well. All right, let's get this thing cut now. Okay, well, that went much better the last time I did that. As you can see, for whatever reason, this one cracked right down in the middle. Luckily, I oversized my cut, so I'll still have plenty for what I need for this top, but that does suck. I'm gonna have to see if I can get enough of this, because I was planning on using that for some of the other pieces, but hopefully we'll have enough. This is why it's probably a good idea to order more laminate than you need.
Now it's time to get that laminate attached to my plywood pieces, and to do this I'm going to use a little something called contact cement. The way this stuff works is you apply it to both pieces, you let them fully dry, and then once they're dry and they make contact with each other, they're stuck. So I basically started by applying the contact cement to all of my little edge pieces first, and then the edges of all the plywood pieces. Now I did cut these edge pieces on my table saw because I didn't have that much scoring work in me. Once I had all of my laminate edges attached to my plywood pieces, then I just came in with my router and a flush trim bit and got everything flush on both the top and the bottom. Then I just repeated that same process for the pieces that were getting attached on top. I applied the contact cement to both surfaces, brushed out any of the air bubbles, and let it fully dry, which took about 30 to 45 minutes. Now it's time to get these laminate pieces attached. First I grabbed a couple of scrap boards and vacuumed them off good to make sure no debris ends up underneath my laminate top. Once they're good and clean, I placed a couple on top of my plywood pieces, and then I carefully placed my sheet of laminate on top of my scrap boards. Then I just line up the laminate so that I have it covering my entire piece. Then I can go ahead and start removing some of those scrap boards while I firmly place the laminate onto my plywood top. This contact will cause the two pieces to stick together. I just work my way out until I have all of my scrap boards removed and my laminate attached. Now once it's attached, I then take a roller and spend a lot of time rolling over the laminate to make sure that I get good adhesion.
All right, I got the pieces for my top laminated now. I did let this sort of set up overnight. Now this contact cement does say that it bonds instantly, but since I plan on routing this, I wanted to give it a little extra time to make sure it was good and solid. So now I just need to basically trim this to size using a flush trim bit. I'm gonna take these pieces outside and get them all trimmed to their exact size.
Now this is the first time that I've ever used laminate for my edges as well. The last time I did this, I used some hardwood trim for my edges, and that turned out so much better, I gotta say. I did end up getting quite a bit of chipping on the edges while I was trimming this up. Now I'd heard that running the router in the opposite direction might help with the chipping, but I actually ended up getting way more chipping that way, so I'm not sure. I could be the problem here, which is honestly very likely. If I could do it over, I would probably just add some hardwood trim instead of using those laminate edges, but I think I can hide those little chips, so you'll never know. Well, you guys will, but I can trust you with this secret, right? My edges were nice and flush now, but they were also nice and sharp. So I took a file and worked on filing down the edges some to smooth them out. I can now get my top pieces attached to the base of the miter saw station. To do this, I just set them in place, got them lined up so that I had an even overhang on each side and clamped in place. Once they were clamped, I attached the tops from the underside with screws. Now, I was very careful here where I placed my screws because my plan is to route out a groove in this top for some T-track, and I'd really like to avoid hitting a screw if possible. Once all of my top pieces were attached, I just made sure everything was good and level before moving on to the next step. I don't know what it is, but something about seeing that level bubble right in the middle just gets me amped up. I guess it lets me know that I've done something right. Next, I wanted to get my miter saw shimmed up to its proper height so that it would sit flush with the top. To do this, I just used a couple of handy shims to get my height right and then attached the miter saw to the base with some screws and washers.
Alright guys, so it's time for the step that I've literally been dreading since the beginning of this build, and that's routing out a groove in this top here for this T-track so that way I can have a stop block system set up. Now, it's a little bit nerve-wracking trying to route a groove in this laminate top because I don't know if I'm gonna get any chip out like I did on some of the edges. I'm hoping that I won't to kind of counteract that. I did install a brand new straight bit in here, so hopefully a really sharp new bit will just cut right through this stuff and I won't have any chip out. But it's still pretty nerve-wracking just because I spent a lot of time. I think the top looks really nice right now. I did go ahead and take a picture of it so that if I totally screw this up, I know that, hey, it looked nice at one time. But anyways, let's just send it. I'm gonna go ahead and route a groove on this piece and then on the piece over there as well, and we'll just hope for the best.
I did call an audible last minute and decided to add a little painter's tape to that section that was going to be routed out. My thinking is that this might help prevent that laminate from chipping as easily. Now, I didn't try to do this all in one pass, so after I made one pass with my router, I lowered my bed and made another pass until I got to the depth I needed for my T-track. I'm proud to report that my T-track fits nicely in my groove and I got zero chip out on that laminate, so we're gonna call that a success. Now, as if routing one groove in my brand new top wasn't scary enough, I decided to add another one. This groove will be much shallower though, and its purpose is to house a tape measurer for my stop block system. Once both of my grooves were routed out, I went ahead and started adding my T-track. I just hammered these into my groove and then attached them with some screws. Now, I did have to cut one of the T-tracks to size, and I just did this very carefully with my miter saw. Since these are aluminum, most miter saws will cut aluminum, but you just have to take it slow. Now it's time to get that adhesive tape measure installed into my grooves. Now the most important thing for this tape measure is that I want it to be accurate. To help me achieve this, I just took a little scrap wood and placed some double-sided tape on it and then stuck it to the base of my miter saw. With my scrap block firmly attached, I then make a cut with my miter saw. This will show me exactly where the blade will be. I should also mention that I made sure my blade was square before this step. Then I placed the adhesive backing tape into my groove and pulled back the paper to expose the adhesive. I will say that this adhesive is extremely sticky, so I feel pretty confident that I'm not going to have any issues with this stuff staying attached. Now, using my scrap block as a reference, I can line up the 0 mark on the tape measure with the very edge of where the blade landed and then stick the tape measure down in my groove. And the really cool thing about this fast cap tape measure is that it's reversible. So all I have to do for applying it to the other side is simply flip it over and start from 0 again from that side. I also added in these little PowerTech stop blocks that fit inside the T-track for making repeatable cuts. Now let's do a little test cut and see if this stop block system is accurate.
Alright guys, that is a wrap on part 3 of this miter saw station build series. We now have a top for our miter saw station, and I have to say that she's looking mighty fancy. I love the way that laminate top looks, the way that that color contrasts with the black base I think looks awesome, and I'm hopeful that that laminate is just going to hold up really well over the years. I also really love that stop block system that I installed with that T-track and fast cap measuring tape. I can finally make repeatable cuts at the miter saw, which is something that I've wanted to do for a very long time. So I'm really, I don't know if you guys knew, but I'm really happy with the way this miter saw station top turned out. That means that we can put the top behind us now and we can move on to the final step for this miter saw station build. And some might say it's one of the more important steps, and that's adding some sort of dust collection to this miter saw. That's gonna take place in part 4 of this video, which is gonna come out next week. Since you've probably watched part 1 through 3 of this build series, I'm hoping by now, then I'm just gonna assume that you're gonna come back for part 4 because you can't miss the grand finale. You need to see how this thing turns out. And spoiler alert, this thing turns out awesome. So I hope you will come back for part 4 of this build series next week so we can finish this thing off together. Thank you guys so much for watching. As I mentioned before, I've got links to everything in the description box below if you want to check out any of the tools or things that I've used in this video. And I'm just gonna say, I'll see you next week. Bye.